I am Andy Alberti, and this is the Andy Alberti Show, coming to you from beautiful downtown Pahrump, Nevada. So, I like to talk about almost anything in general. So, if you call in or you listen, and you want to hear just the same old pablum you get from Fox and NBC and those stations, well, then you don't have to listen. But I talk about the things they don't talk about. And I like to talk about them because I like my audience to think. Now, you may say to yourself, wait a minute, I think all the time. Well, you may think, but sometimes there are things that you don't think about when you're thinking. And that's what I try to get you to do. Now, every week prior to the show, I do a breakfast with a group of local activists here in Pahrump. And we talk about issues that affect our lives here in town. Now, just because we talk about what affects us here doesn't mean it doesn't affect you either. I have people on my email list that have moved out of town and have written to me to tell me that the things we talked about here are happening where they moved to: Virginia, South Carolina, Wisconsin. It's no different no matter where you go. And what's the most important thing you need when you talk about an issue? Well, somebody tells you, if somebody tells you something, you have to think about this. Who is it they're talking about? Like at breakfast, somebody mentioned that they were telling us this. Well, who was they? Give us a name. If the person at breakfast can't give us a name, they don't get to tell us the story. Too often you'll hear that there's some committee or some organization has been formed. What you really need to know is who's leading that organization? What's their background? What's their objective? Is that the real objective, or are they just raising money? And even our government people are the same way. If somebody says to me, the governor is going to give us more money, I want to know, which governor are we talking about? The current governor? The governor who was last in office? I don't know. Got to be specific. And the reason I mention that is I'm looking at a little brochure that was sent to me. Contact Governor Sisolak and urge him to reject SB 420. Now, on the backside, it said, urgent, Nevada healthcare information enclosed. I wanted to see what they're writing in the law. I don't want somebody sending me something that says it will increase the cost of private employer and individual health insurance. Where is that? So I got this thing. I looked at it, and I decided that I'm too old to care. I have Humana, I have Healthcare Partners, I have VA Help, and whatever Mr. Sisolak is going to do in his evil cronies in government. And I don't want to tell you that they're beneficial, because too often I hear about how people in government, both elected and bureaucrats, are feathering their own nests. And if you think they're not feathering their own nest, you got to look at what they're being paid. There's a doctor, and he is receiving $1.3 million a year to work for Nevada government. Well, that's not a bad sum, but every year he's a millionaire on tax dollars. I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to me. And maybe somewhere along the line, we'll wise up. But that means we have got to pay attention to what we see and to ask questions and get specific details about what we're looking at. Now, I don't object to them paying him $1 million, but he's not the only one. Did you know that your government was making millionaires with your tax dollars? I bet you didn't. But you should know who those people are. And I'm sure somebody's going to say to me, you know what? Why don't you tell us who it is? You know, I'm going to do a little better than that because I don't think you should trust what I tell you either. So I'm going to tell you where to find it. All you have to do is go on the internet and type in on a search engine, Transparent Nevada. That's it. When that site comes up in Nevada, now this is only Nevada, but I think every state in the nation should do this. But we had people in Nevada who filed a lawsuit against the state for not disclosing how much state employees are being paid, both their salary and their benefits. But they won. They went all the way to the Nevada Supreme Court, and they won. The bureaucrats could not beat them down. So here it is. Go to Transparent Nevada, step one. That's transparentnevada.com. Then a list will come up, and you can either search the entire state for a name, or you can search a department within the state, or you can search the county. A lot of possibilities. And that, if you search the state of Nevada, that's where you'll find who's being paid $1,300,000 a year. Tax dollars. And then you'll find out what, but it doesn't tell you what he's doing for the state, but it tells you what his position is. And you should know that. And people say you shouldn't get a college diploma. Yeah, right. So that's an important thing. So at breakfast this morning, or I should say after breakfast, I had a conversation with a fellow who walked into the museum. And I asked the question of both him and a fellow that works at the museum, what's the greatest invention of mankind? Don't tell me people kind. Don't tell me they. I don't want to hear that crap. You can take that home and you can wipe your butt with it. I want to know, what's the greatest invention in all the history of human beings? Now, when I went to school, I was told it was the wheel. Because without the wheel, you couldn't have cars, you couldn't have carts. There's a lot of things you couldn't do. But I had come to the realization in my old age, I shouldn't say my old age, my advanced superior knowledge of my age, that the greatest invention was record keeping. Now, it wasn't the computer, it wasn't electricity, it was record keeping. And I'll tell you a little about new inventions. New inventions are never applied to something that's a new idea. It's an improvement on an old idea. So the first record keeping that theoretically, everything I talk about here is going to be theoretical. Everything that we have discovered thus far looks as though it came from primitive human beings. And this goes back 40, 50,000 years. Even at one point, it's believed that there's some artifacts going back 100,000 years. Previous life on the planet that at one time we didn't know existed. So, why do I say this? You know, without record keeping, someone born today would not know anything about what happened before they were born. Oh, they would be able to go up and they could see a computer, they could see a laptop, there's things they could do. But in reality, they have no life experience of the life before that. I mean, when they were born, they had no knowledge. I'm saying that tongue in cheek because there are some examples of people who have been born with a prior life knowledge, and I may get into that for a little bit, but that's the thing. World War II. If you didn't live in World War II, that's something that's written in the history books that you can see videos about it or old time movies, but you didn't live it. You have no clue what it was like to be in Germany or to be in England or France during World War II and having the fear that somebody is taking over your country, bombing out your buildings. You may not survive another 2 minutes because of the war that's going on. When the Germans walked into Germany, they outsmarted the French. I'm sorry, when the Germans walked into France, they outsmarted the French. The French built this Maginot Wall, and they thought that was going to protect them. Well, the Germans just went around it. The thinking of the people who promised the French people safety from the German warfare did not. Now what? You see pictures and videos of the concentration camps where other human beings were taken away because of what they were and put into these camps until they died there. A mass of flesh and bone, no meat under that flesh. An ugly sight. The first time my wife and I watched one of those videos, it was a video of the U.S. troops arriving at one of the concentration camps. And before the troops, you would think they'd rush in and help the people. No, no. The person who was in charge called for the photographers and the videographers to come and document what they were going to see. Tears streamed down my face for the horror that I looked at. I have never seen that video on tape again, anywhere. It exists. You'll see snippets of it here and there, but to see the whole horrible experience, history books don't do it justice. What if you had lived in there? You think that can't happen anymore. I will promise you this. If you think it can't happen, it probably may. Well, that's not saying exactly that it will, but it does mean that there's an experience here that we have to look at because I don't think we ever want to see that happen again. So, what could cause that? Well, one of the things that could cause that is a loss of all the money. And I mentioned that because there was a recent article in the newspaper. I believe everything I read except what I don't believe. And I'm not sure how much of this I like, but here's what the article said. There was an update gone wrong on the internet, and a San Francisco-based company was hit by an outage that caused many of the world's top websites to briefly go offline. And the problem was blamed on a software bug that was triggered when a customer changed a setting. Now, I would never have thought a customer changing a setting could have caused this. And the problem at Fastly, the company, meant that internet users couldn't connect to several popular websites early Tuesday, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Twitch, Reddit, and the British government's homepage. But what if you couldn't access your money? What if you didn't have dollars or yen or whatever money your government uses? If you didn't have access to it because the internet went down, I don't care what you do. You might never see that money again. Now, how could this happen? It's possible. So I asked one of the fellows at breakfast this morning. we talked about this article, and I said, I can't imagine that somebody changing a setting, a user changing a setting, could take down the internet like this. And he said, well, it's probably not that he changed the setting, but there may have been a virus attached to his system that when he went to change that setting, it infiltrated the whole system, and that's what shut it down. Now, that's plausible. That's possible. It could have happened. So when you think you're safe, you may be safe at home because they don't give a crap about you. You're just a bill payer every month. What they really care about is the big money. And that's usually what they go after. So if you didn't have money, think about what would you do? As a matter of fact, if you couldn't access your money because the internet went down, where would you go for information these days? The newspaper? If they could get it printed. What if the power grid went out? Let me tell you about the power grid here. The power grid between you and me and the goalpost is weak. When they first built the power grid and kept expanding it out, they anticipated that the equipment would be able to would only have to handle 50% of the maximum load. So, in other words, if my equipment is capable of handling 100 amperes, the maximum that equipment would ever see would be 50, not 100. So there was that much safety margin built into it in case something happens. But you know, as the company grew, as the country grew over the years, we used more and more electricity. And the power grid, instead of upgrading the equipment to handle the higher load, they increased the voltage, which put more stress on the equipment. So if you have equipment capable of handling 100 amperes, and it used to be 50 amperes that it was seeing, so you had this big safety margin, eventually the load became like 80 amps. Now you're getting close to the maximum capacity of the equipment. And every day you hear about we're going to get electric cars, everything's going to be electric, we'll no longer use gas, we'll use electricity to cook, to heat, to cool, everything. Just what do you think is going to happen to this grid that delivers electricity to your house if it went down? It could be a financial disaster, not only financial, but an environmental disaster for everyone who lives on the planet. How could this happen now? Let's say that it's not something that we did. Let's say there's another place where the damage could come from. And where would that be? It could be a solar flare. You know, we get solar flares all the time. When we send these satellites up into space, they have to do a process called hardening the electronics, which means it has to be protected from electrical surges that they can get from these solar flares. As a matter of fact, there was an experiment they did once where they trailed a half-mile long wire behind a device up in space while they were still in the Earth's magnetic field. It created too much power, just dragging it through the field. So stuff can happen, all right? And we're talking cryptocurrency here now. That's one of the things that, you know, when you have cryptocurrency, that's electronics. We never had money like this that would take so much electrical power to handle transactions. And in what they call the blockchain of cryptocurrency, the information is divided up in many places. In some ways, it can be reconstructed because it's divided so long, but for the most part, it's encrypted. And typically you can't find it, you can't trace it. The government normally can't trace it, although they are getting pretty good at figuring out ways where they might be able to. Maybe that'd be an interesting show on another day. So I'm bringing this up because the Federal Reserve in this country, United States, is looking at developing cryptocurrency. This is electronic money that you never touch. I don't want to get into how all that works because that would be another show, but you can find out information on YouTube or places like that. But I do want to tell you that because the Federal Reserve and other financial institutions in other countries are looking at cryptocurrency, according to today's news, El Salvador's Legislative Assembly has approved legislation making cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, legal tender in the country. Legal tender is a big deal. What does legal tender mean? It means if I want to pay you in Bitcoin, you'd have to take it in their country. And the digital currency was originally created to be money out of the control of governments because governments learned to abuse the money system. We're seeing that in the United States right now. And so it can be, but this money can be used in any transaction and any business, and that business will have to accept payment in Bitcoin with the exception of those lacking the technology to do so. Well, there's the rub. If you don't have the technology, you don't have to accept Bitcoin. So let's say you have the technology and somebody wants to pay you in El Salvador. Well, if I tell you I don't have the technology, you'll have to pay me in dollars. How the hell am I going to know? Is there going to be a list? Will the business be honest about it? Well, I'll tell you what. Bitcoin's kind of like the stock market. Bitcoin at one time was $250 a coin. When you see it getting to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for a Bitcoin, it's like the stock market. It just went up. You can't make things like this up. It's true. So if you paid somebody with a Bitcoin tomorrow and they charge you one Bitcoin, you'd be paying $40,000 for a multi. But if they would take that same Bitcoin 2 years ago when Bitcoin was below 8,000, it would have been an $8,000 multi. I don't know how this is all going to play out because I just have a problem with if the Bitcoin doesn't have a consistent value, how is this going to work amongst the people who have to use it as legal tender? So the fact that El Salvador is mandating this will be the first experiment that we will truly see how well this is going to work. Now they can, this is another thing, they can still use the US dollar as El Salvador's currency. And no one will be forced to pay in Bitcoin. But if it's legal tender, you have to be forced to take it. That's what legal tender is all about. Take out a dollar bill or $100 bill, I don't care. It says legal tender. It means that if you pay somebody with that, they have to take it. You can't pay them in French francs or British currency or wherever you go. You don't have to take that, but you do have to take the US dollar. Anyway, that was approved in their legislation late this past week. It's so exciting to live in the world today. Things are happening so fast. When we look at what's going on in our country today, even in our own town, you know, sometimes government gets so much money that they just don't know what to do with it. And sometimes they take government property, which comes off the tax rolls. So everybody got excited in Nye County in Pahrump when the county commissioners were going to buy a golf course that was laying fallow because it was becoming a piece of crap and an eyesore to the people who lived around it. So the county bought it. That property originally was on the tax rolls. When the county bought it, it doesn't have to be on the tax rolls anymore. So who were we rescuing to do that? And now we're reading that the county wants to sell it. Now, I don't know what's motivating our county commissioners. God bless them and the lives they lead, because they don't get paid very much, that's for sure. So they must be making somewhere. I don't know. Maybe it's a family thing. So now they want to sell that golf course and put it back on the tax rolls. But why would they take my money to buy somebody else's golf course so the people who live around that golf course can enjoy the view? I suggested maybe what they should do is create a special taxing district for those people who live around the golf course. Then they could buy it, and the people who live around there would pay for the cost of purchase and maintenance. Golf courses are a tough business. And I do have to say, my county has a great golf course down in Mountain Falls. I've talked to people who come to Pahrump in the summertime in the 100-degree heat to play golf on that golf course. And they told me it's a great course. Our son comes out here from Southern California, lives in Illinois. And when he comes out here, the first thing he wants to do is get a spot on the golf course to go out in the morning. And he'll be out there most of the day. And he tells us it's a great golf course. You don't have to go to Pebble Beach. Sometimes the course there isn't that great. But you come out here, and the course out here is really a nice course. But not the one that the county bought. And the big problem is, who's going to run a county-run golf course? Because now maybe they could contract that out to somebody, but typically counties don't do that. Typically, they want to hire a few people to go out and maintain the grounds, kill the weeds, trap the rattlesnakes, catch the rabbits and have them for dinner. You know, to me, the less things government does personally, the better off we are. I would much rather see companies contracted to do certain things that the county takes on themselves. That's not to say that we don't have good people working in the county and government. We do. I just have to question some of the managers and the people who are elected who run it. So not everything is as you see it, because there are governments that are not government. You know, in the beginning, I talked about the greatest invention being record keeping. And every day I learn something new that I didn't know before because it's in the records. And I watch shows on the internet and on television about what they're discovering all over planet Earth about the history in the records. Trouble is, we don't know how to read those records properly. Even when you talk about the Bible, now when people talk about what's written in the Bible, they're questioning things. And I appreciate that they're questioning it, not because they're challenging what's in the Bible, but they're asking, what does this really mean? As an example, there were 2 Enochs in the Bible. Now, listen, I am no Bible expert. Believe me, and if I make a mistake of something I'm about to tell you, you are free to make a note and send me an email, andy@cparumpwithandy.com, and I will gladly accept your guidance. But as I understand it, there were 2 Enochs. And if you look, one of them did not die according to the Bible. And I believe it was Enoch. I don't have the Bible here with me. Maybe I'll bring one to the next show. We'll double check. But it keeps in the Bible. It keeps talking about various people, who they were, when they had their children, and how long they lived, and they died. But one person in the Bible, it does not say they died. It says they went with God. That's different. And if you think I don't know what I'm talking about, go pull one out. Pull out your Bible and go take a look. When it talks about Noah and Enoch and those guys, you'll see. So that raises a question. What do they mean he didn't die? He went somewhere and he never came back. That's not the only odd thing in there. But my point is, that is a record of history that people wrote long ago in a different language that we're trying to understand the language. Do you ever try to understand a foreign language? Chinese? I took a course in Chinese a semester. And because I guess I'm from New York originally, I adapted to their speech sounds, if you will. And the instructor, after my first semester, came up to me. Everybody in the class was Chinese except me and one other guy. And the instructor came up to me and he said, you know, I don't know what your background is, but you have no accent when you speak our language. Well, I thanked him for that. I was kind of surprised to hear that. But I think it's because I was raised in an area of the country where it was a melting pot of a lot of different languages. And I just rotated into it. So the first semester was about learning the words and little phrases. But the second semester was about speaking with people, learning full sentences. But that's a real problem because when you get a Chinese language and everybody in that community, this was in Hacienda Heights and Roland Heights and Walnut and Diamond Bar, that area, and other places also, the Chinese population had really come in very strong. So the students going there to get a degree at the college were all Chinese. They already spoke the language. They was getting easy credits. So they could speak it, but they couldn't speak it with me because I was not living in their community. I lived somewhere else. I say that because when we try and look at an old language, hieroglyphics, even beyond that, it's very difficult to really get it right. There's a spot in the Bible when I went to Catholic school as a child. And I can remember the nuns would be teaching us about the Ten Commandments. And the nuns said one of the commandments was, thou shalt not, she was going through the list. And her words were, thou shalt not kill. And all my life, I believed that was the right wording. Until a talk show host on the radio said that we have been misled all these years, and the word is not kill, it's murder. Well, that changes the whole meaning. If you say thou shalt not kill, then a murderer shall not be killed, even if they slaughtered 1,000 people. Because thou shalt not kill. But that's not what it says. It really said thou shalt not murder. So I went back and I looked, after I heard that was Michael Savage, by the way, who brought that up. And so I went online, I have several Bibles at home. I have a Christian Bible, I have a Mormon, I have a couple of others, the King James Version, I have a Dewey Reams version. And I went in to look, and sure enough, thou shalt not murder. Now, if you murder someone, that's a violation of the Ten Commandments. And the old thing about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, I believe in that. I think if there was more of that, there would be less crime. But you idiots out there, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. There's a guy named Brian Shapiro on the radio out of Las Vegas, and he calls people who don't agree with him idiots, stupid, morons. I have a whole list of words that he's used. I really don't like to look at it that way. I just look at them as misinformed and misunderstood. But not Brian Shapiro, that jerk. Oh, there I go again. But I've learned from Brian. And to me, Brian Shapiro is a nutcase. He tries to act like he's so smart and the rest of us are stupid. Anybody who does that needs to learn a lesson. But he is on the radio and he gets away with it. And I think as long as nobody complains about him, and I'll give you 10 to 1, if somebody complains about him, some organization, and him calling all these people stupid and morons and idiots and what have you, I bet you he'd still be on the radio. In my opinion, he could be on the radio, but he should respect the people who call and talk to him. And he wants to monopolize the conversation. But when people call in, you should want to hear what they have to say, what they think. And if you don't like what they think, ask them why they think that way. And then thank them for calling. Tell them you don't agree. But not Brian Shapiro. Someday in archaeology, somebody will see his show and say what I say. I will never, in my wildest dreams, tell somebody that they're stupid, because everybody has a different way of looking at things. And when you look at the recorded history, let's look at recorded history. Sometimes we think we know things, and then we go back and reread what we've known and find out that we're now got a different opinion. I used to think about Noah in the Bible. And Noah, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Why they had to mention the nights, I don't know, because I figured 40 days I count all day long. Anyway, I always thought when he sends out the dove, it was a couple of days and the dove brings back a branch. Not according to what I read these days. It was 150 days after the rain stopped that they first saw the mountains peeking through the water. So technically, they were on that boat, if it was a boat. Could have been some other device. But they were on that boat for 150 days plus 40 days. That's 190 days. And maybe even a little longer until the water recedes enough so the boat could settle down, if it was a boat. How much food, how would you feed everyone on that boat? Every animal, every person? I don't know the answer to that one. To me, that's a mystery. It should be a mystery to you too. And I have friends who take everything that's written in these books as, without a doubt, true. But maybe it's true, but it's not something we're comprehending correctly. So this greatest invention of record keeping is as good as our understanding of what's in the record. I mean, if you look at cave drawings, I always wonder, what the hell are people going into caves and doing drawings? What's the matter with going outside and putting it on the side of a rock? But they're inside of caves that these things happen. Did they know that people, thousands of years later, would discover them and question what happened during the time they did those cave drawings? It was just a lucky thing that we figured out. But it is record keeping. And now we know for sure that there have been things on this planet Earth that we are only now starting to realize, truly realize and talk about. We know how big, well, we don't really know. We know the universe is huge, and we are a minuscule speck inside that universe. And now they think that there's more than one verse, there's multiverses. And now they're looking at how matter is made. I remember when I was young and I was taught that the atom was the basic building block of matter. And I used to think to myself, what? How does that work? And now they're talking about all kinds of muons and whatever, you name it. Can't follow it all. And there's a guy named Davies who writes some really interesting books about science. And he delves into these things, maybe sometimes in a little too much detail, but it's in the record. When they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was record keeping. They hoped that those scrolls would be found one day. And we look at how old they were before they were found. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. In Russia, they were digging 30 feet down and they found some very small artifacts that looked like a piece of tubing with a coil wrapped around it. 30 feet down. I hope it wasn't 30 meters, otherwise I'm not telling it like it is. But either way, undisturbed ground and that far down in the soil. What a mystery. And if you think that we as the human population can't revert back to that, take electricity and water and take it away. And I guarantee you in 100 years, you wouldn't recognize planet Earth. So with that, I have a couple of things I wanted to bring up today. At breakfast this morning, I had planned to talk about law. Now, law from a layman's standpoint. And you know, we all as people have to live under the law. Some not so much, others strictly. I've always believed that I don't want to go to jail. I always believed I didn't want to get into trouble. And once in a while that could happen to you because you don't know what laws exist. Now how are we as a people supposed to live in a country, in an environment where we don't know what the law is? Oh, well, you have to go get a lawyer. But even the lawyer doesn't know what the law is. Because I have found out that when we go and read the law, they don't, unless a question comes up. And then they go to an electronic law on the internet called Lois Law or Westlaw, and they can go in there and they can do a search for cases and things about the law. And if the lawyers really understood the law and the judges, why would we have to have an appeals court? And why would we have to have, beyond that, a court above that? Federal courts, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court to get a final decision. And when all the courts below the Supreme Court have been wrong, because the Supreme Court reverses what they were making their decisions on, when the U.S. Supreme Court says, you guys are wrong, and we're supposed to trust them to properly apply the law. Well, here's the problem as I see it. We have too much law. Let me give you an example. Do you know how many types of law there are? I do. I'm going to read to you the different types of law that exist. And sometimes you may get snared up in some of this law and not others. You don't have to know it all. But here's a list of the types of law. And what I'm going to give you is, there's actually 21 different types of law. There's admiralty law, which is technically the law of contracts. Then there's bankruptcy law to protect your ass when no other choice exists for you. There's business or corporate law, bankruptcy law again. There's there's civil rights law. There's criminal law, entertainment, family, health, immigration, intellectual property, international, labor law, military law, personal law, real estate law, tax law, and there's a few more. Wow. You know, when you get a real estate license, they tell you that all you things you learned in school, in the classes, in the testing, you'll probably not use most of that because you'll pick an area to specialize in, and that's how you'll earn a living. And they're right. That's typically what happens. And when you look at all these different types of laws that I mentioned, there's actually a few more. And I didn't get a chance to talk about that at the breakfast this morning, but I do think it's important that we understand how complicated the law has gotten. And we rely on lawyers who are people like you and me, who have been given the power to speak for us in court. You know, when you go to court, you are not allowed to speak unless you're providing testimony. Your lawyer speaks for you, and you will shut up. Now, you can give your lawyer instruction as to what you'd like him to do, but it's up to him. One of the areas of law here that I have not found mentioned anywhere was arbitration. It's a separate type of law. And even in arbitration, which I think is a very bad thing for you as an individual, even in arbitration, you cannot speak. Your lawyer will speak for you. And there's a brotherhood in the law business where you have the lawyer that you hired, you have the judge who's a lawyer, belongs to the state bar of Nevada. You have Supreme Court judges who are lawyers. You have the Nevada Bar made up of the lawyer organization. And you as a citizen do not belong to that elite group of people. So you are just flotsam and jetsam out there on the ocean. And someone will have to speak on your behalf, your lawyer. There is one wrinkle. You can represent yourself. And people will tell you if you have a fool for a lawyer if you represent yourself. And now that might be true for the average person because I just read you all these different types of law. And that wasn't everything. I gave you enough. But sometimes there are those of us who like to read what the law says, who do not fear going into court, and have learned how to express ourselves so it's appreciated in the court. In my past life, I have gone against, personally, a lawyer from Newport Beach who represented one of my clients. And he got before the judge and started to lie. Now, he was the lawyer. He can lie. He can do anything he wants because he's speaking on behalf of his client. And I stopped him in mid-sentence in front of the judge, and I objected, and I made a statement that everything this man is saying is false. At that point, the lawyer said to me, "Your Honor, may we step outside?" In which we negotiated the deal. Now, I don't know what he had been told by his client, but it was all untrue. But it was over a lot of money. That's where it was. So if you don't know what the law is and you have to hire a lawyer, how do you know which lawyer to hire? It's really difficult. The union, when you have a union employee, will tell you every union employee is as good as any other union employee. If you own the business or you're managing the department, you know better. But that's the approach. So every lawyer is a good lawyer except for the ones who stole from their clients. You know, people have done that. And you read about it in the papers periodically. And lawyers don't steal small sums. It's big sums in the millions. There's no way they could ever pay that back. And sometimes they're just given a pass because they were good guys, really, and didn't mean to do wrong. Didn't mean to do wrong. Give me a break, folks. Now, I'm not negative about all lawyers. There are some great lawyers out there. Just like there were some great real estate agents, there were some great storytellers, there were great people on television, but there's also the schmucks. They're out there too. How do you identify them? Even in an arbitration, how do you know how to pick an arbitrator? Can you go arbitrator shopping? You know, when you go to an arbitration, everybody's got a credit card, and in that credit card these days, you agree to arbitration. Well, the credit card I have sent me a letter 2 years ago and advised me in the letter, what was in small print, that if I did not want to arbitrate any issues, I had to write back to them and tell them I didn't want that arbitration clause to be effective. And so with my particular credit card, for me personally, there was no arbitration requirement. Now, it doesn't say I can't, but I want the possibility of arbitrate or not to be my choice. When I was a realtor, the realtors came along, and you know, realtors have a code of ethics, and in their code of ethics, the National Association of Realtors determined that real estate people should arbitrate issues of commission. Now, I didn't agree with that. I don't like to arbitrate anything before I know what the issue is and who's going to be the arbitrator. I actually I've been to two arbitrations, one as a realtor and one, well, actually both as a realtor, one against a lawyer, and one of the lawyers was Wells Fargo. Anyway, so I went before them, and technically I've never lost. But I learned my lessons on small claims courts in California. So what are you to do as a citizen? I really feel that we need to take a second look. Who is it that decides to write the law, all these different types of law? That you and I have no clue what's in it, and yet you go shopping every day and probably break some kind of law? You go shop at a store, and you want to return something to the store, so you bring it back and you say, I'd like my money back. This is a piece of crap, and it doesn't work. And they say, I'm sorry, we don't refund money, but we'll give you credit towards your next purchase. Maybe I don't want to deal with that store anymore. Did they tell you that when you bought the product? They probably had a sign on the wall that you never read. By the way, I mention that because I just had that experience. So we all live and learn. We all make mistakes, and we learn from our mistakes. If we keep repeating the same mistakes, it's on us. So who'd you vote for the last time? Did you vote for that person again? Do you want more of the same? We voted for a Republican governor who created a $1 billion tax increase in the state of Nevada. A Republican who claimed he was conservative. His cronies, when it came time for election, didn't like who was running. And guess what? His cronies tried to set up a separate Republican Party. I want those guys to represent me because they don't. Dean Heller was one of those guys. I had respect for Dean Heller in the beginning, but after that stunt, no, it's all about power and money. And we, the people, need to have the power. If the laws are not simplified so we can understand the basic rules, then the laws should not apply. I go back to the thou shalt not kill part. They keep arguing in court it's cruel and humane to kill somebody who murdered somebody else. Brutally cut them up into pieces. Murdered their own child. And it's cruel for us to put them to death. I maintain that they were good people until the point where they crossed the barrier between murdering and not murdering. And once you've crossed the barrier, I have no confidence in your sanity or the ability to trust you that I can even be around you. Don't want to be there. I can accept anything else. Somebody who is a thief, somebody who robs you or threatens you, that's fine. But they have not killed you. They have not maimed you. But once you've done that, we need to think about this. And we need to think about all these. You know how many laws? I was reading the newspaper last week, and there were 500 and some odd new laws that were passed in Nevada, and they were only in session for 4 months, 120 days. I can't wait to see what the total tally was. Do you think they even read those things? We know that they don't read them. And they don't write them. Somebody else writes the laws and then they bring it to the floor. And maybe some of them they'll get public input. But over 500? Give me a break, folks. If that happens every 2 years in Nevada, can you imagine what you're looking at? I can't. I just, it boggles the, I don't know what the hell a boggle is, but that's the phrase. It boggles the mind. I should look that, I think I'll look that up. On the next show, I'll talk about what a boggle is. I know what cobble is because I watched the gold prospecting shows. Cobblestones, isn't that amazing? Cobblestones, and now they're prospecting for gold and they're looking for cobble. I thought cobble was a country, but anyway, I guess I've kind of bloviated on this a bit, but I didn't mean to. I did want to mention just one thing before we come to the end of the show, and that is Nye County School District. For the 2021 school year, there are 28 public schools in Nye County, according to public documents, serving 5,358 students in Nye County. According to the article, Nye County has one of the highest concentrations of top-ranked public schools in Nevada. The top-ranked public schools in Nye County are, in order, Duckwater Elementary School. Duckwater. You know what Duckwater is? Gabbs Elementary School and Round Mountain High School. Overall testing rank is based on a school's combined math and reading proficiency test score rating. Now, the next column, the next paragraph says Nye County Public Schools have an average math proficiency score of 28% and reading proficiency score of 39%. I'm having nightmares over this. The teachers must be having nightmares. How could this be happening? And why would we pay a superintendent $150,000 a year to create this kind of mess? You need to ask yourselves that question. You as parents, you as citizens, you as taxpayers. Well, that's about all I got to say this week. Well, I actually got a lot more to say, but we're coming to the end of the show. I will be on again next Thursday at 5 p.m. If you like what you heard and would like to hear more, send me an email, Andy@cparumpwithandy.com or Andy@andyalberti.com. And with that, thank you for listening. And your host is now out of here.